Hi everyone, it's Jen. I decided to tackle the topic of visual literacy and its implications for classroom learning, and I thought a nice way to do that would be through a teacher workshop. So I'm going to take you through what the workshop would be like and how it would run in this presentation. So first, my goals and objectives would be to define visual literacy, to discuss its implications for the classroom, and lastly to highlight best practices and some resources that teachers could use. So I would begin the presentation by having participants turn and talk to the people around them about what they think visual literacy is and how an understanding of visual literacy could be helpful in the classroom. So, to define visual literacy is the ability to interpret, use, and create visual media in ways that advance thinking, decision-making, communication, and learning. And these are definitely all skills that students need as they move forward both in school and outside of school. Visual literacy was a phrase first coined by John Dewis in 1969, but it really has prehistoric roots. There were cave dwellers made drawings very frequently. There were a number of Mandarin characters that really came into effect before we had words to put down what the phrase actually was. So this really goes back much further in our history than just 1969. And it's important to remember that visual literacy is a form of communication. All too often I think people hear the word visual and think a picture or an image, and while that's certainly a part of it, it's not limited to just graphics. And how does this connect to traditional literacies? Well, what's most common or most familiar in the classroom is what we would consider verbal literacy, and those are the traditional reading and writing activities. But if we wanted to connect those to visual literacy, or the student's ability to interpret and create visual information, we could break it down that the reading type activities are very much like interpreting visuals, and the writing type activities are very much like creating or producing visuals or graphic projects today. And I also think it's important to keep in mind what visual literacy is not. Visual literacy is not an inherent aspect of our knowledge, but it's a learned skill. Just as you don't learn to write by reading, you don't become visually literate by watching TV alone. Those things can certainly help. Reading obviously helps your writing ability, and watching TV can help you hone your critical thinking skills, but one doesn't simply come from the other. You need more of a background to it. Also, kind of going along with that, I think a big misconception about visual literacy is that being technologically aware means you're visually literate, and that's not the case. Someone can be very tech savvy and very good with a computer, but not really know how to analyze or think through what they're actually viewing. And last, I think it's very important to remind students that seeing is not believing anymore. That may have been the case in the past, but today with the amount of doctoring of images or photo editing that's easily and readily available to people, we can't necessarily believe what we see anymore. We have to really look with a more critical eye. So, why are visuals so powerful? And as you can see, this is very biologically based. First off, the eye is the most direct pathway to the brain. 40% of the fibers from our eyes are connected to the brain, which is a very large number going towards visual processing. Also, we're biologically programmed to respond to the colors that we see. For example, red activates the pituitary gland to release epinephrine, and we have a biological reaction to that. And third, nerve cells for visual processing take up 30% of the brain. And to some this may not sound like a lot, but when it's compared with only 8% going towards touch and 3% going towards auditory processing, that 30% is a very large number. So, consider this example. At this point I would ask everyone to picture a pink flower with a yellow center. And I would then ask for a show of hands of how many people pictured an image that looked like this. How many people pictured an image that looked like this? How many people pictured an image that looked like this? And how many of the participants thought of something completely different? And why this is different, because it really touches upon the classroom implications. It's very important to remember that images are much more precise than words. They're a very powerful form of communication. Each of these flowers can be described as pink with a yellow center, but they're all very different, and participants may have even pictured a clip art type image or a cartoonized image. So even though they're seeing pink with a yellow center, they're not seeing the exact image I want them to. So it's very important for teachers to remember that this can put all of our learners on a level playing field. whether they may be English language learners or students with disabilities, or simply just students that might struggle a little bit more in the classroom. This allows everyone to start from the same point instead of having some kind of confusion going on. Also, images hit the heart of what we value. I heard an analogy that if unfortunately there were a fire, after you knew that your family and your friends and your pets were out safely, many people say that the first thing that they would grab would be their photo albums, because those images are tangible reminders of the things that are important to us, times that we really enjoyed, people that are important to us. So those things really conjure up those feelings again, and it's important to us. Also, images convey information and emotion simultaneously. Even though we tell students all the time, don't judge a book by its cover, that's how we really judge things initially, is we get a strong reaction from an image, and we think, I would like to read that, I wouldn't like to read that, or that looks appealing to me, or that doesn't look appealing to me. And then we begin to think through and read the jacket of the book, things like that. And so it's really something that conveys information very quickly while also evoking an emotional reaction. And lastly, images foster creativity and critical thinking skills. So I'm going to show an image, and at this point I would ask everyone to think about what comes to mind when they view the image, and we would speak for a few moments, and then I would read this passage. The boy in this picture could be thinking many thoughts. One might be, I'm not getting enough attention, or I wish you would just go away. He is standing where his mom can't see him, and the look on his face is a mix of loneliness, sadness, and curiosity. He is probably thinking that he wants to be little again, so his mother can look at him the same way she is looking at his baby sister. It is the middle of the afternoon in the summertime. It must be hot outside, because they aren't wearing very much, and also because you wouldn't take a baby out of the house, especially a newborn dressed like that, in the winter or the fall. I like how this picture was taken. How the mom is gently holding the baby, how the son is watching her longingly, the time of year, the time of day, everything. And at this point I would encourage people to really think about the words that this student wrote about the picture, and think of how old they might expect the student to be. And then I would inform them that this writing came from an 8-year-old student. And why I think that's very important and very powerful is that it really shows that students of all ages can benefit from visual instruction in the classroom. For primary students, it's easier for them to process concrete images rather than abstract thoughts first. For intermediate students, it gives them an opportunity to connect with a larger audience. And for secondary students especially, it really prepares them for the real world, for how to think through what they're looking at and how to critically analyze something. And also, just in general, 65% of the population are visual learners, so this can definitely benefit everyone in the classroom regardless of age or ability level. Some benefits for learning, and as you can see, these statistics are pretty staggering. Color visuals increase a willingness to read by 80%. It improves retention rate by 75%. The 3M Corporation did a study where they found people were able to process visual information 60,000 times faster than textual information. And incorporating visuals improves learning by 400%, and that includes an increased transfer of information to long-term memory by 89%. So, when to incorporate visual literacy? Of course, the question that all teachers will ask. And my answer to that would be as often as possible. And I'm not saying that this needs to be in addition to everything else that we have, but in conjunction with it. And one of the best ways to do that is to use it with verbal instruction, and that's in a process called dual encoding. And basically this presents the same information delivered through both the visual and the verbal means. So it really hits independent but interdependent parts of the brain. And when combined, images and sound, it can increase students' retention rate by 42%. And again, this isn't just displaying information, but allowing students to create it as well. So at this point, I would ask for a volunteer to participate in the Stroop test. And I'm sure that many of you have seen this before. This is the test where you first ask students to read the word that's printed, and then you ask them to read the color. And many younger students can do this, but the older ones can't. And the important part in this is one of the very important factors to consider when you're choosing images and graphics. The first would be to know your students. That includes their academic and cognitive levels, their visual acuity, and also their cultures, especially with color. For example, red in our culture signifies alarm, but in many Asian colors it signifies luck. Also, your lesson goals and your objectives. If I wanted to test a student on how they process colors, I don't think I would give them the Stroop test with, for example, the word blue in green if I wanted to know that they could really recognize the color green. That wouldn't really match my goal, and it would provide something that was extraneous, which would be distracting, and that's not really hitting the objective that I want to. So those are important things to consider. And how can knowledge of visual literacy be translated into the classroom? Well, I think this is the most important thing we need to remember, is that as teachers, we need to teach and encourage students to ask thoughtful questions. For example, what am I looking at? What does this image mean to me? What is the relationship between the image and the displayed text message? And how is this message effective, so that they can really critically think through all the visual elements of the image. And at this point, I would encourage students to look at this picture and tell me if they think the woman is 18 or 81. This one threw me off for a very long time. I couldn't actually see that the image was both an 18-year-old and an 81-year-old at the same time. I had to really think it through and actually put my hand on the picture to see both different women in the picture. And similar to this is a video clip where the dancer is spinning, and some people see her spinning to the right and others see her spinning to the left. So that's something where you can use these as tools to get students to really look at critically what they're looking at and think about what they're looking at. So some best practices. This really begins with teacher modeling and inclusion, which can be picture books, comics, political cartoons, presentations, anything like that in the classroom. Also creating digital stories and products on the student's end. And lastly, an important thing to keep in mind is it does not have to be monumentally technological. Howard Gardner reminds us that technology does not necessarily improve education. Take a simple innovation like the pencil. One can use it to write a superlative essay, to drum away time, or to poke someone's eye out. So it really depends on how you use the tool. If you do have access to Web 2.0 tools, they can be very helpful, and I won't go through all of these with you, but what I've done is I've highlighted production sites, photo and photo editing sites, digital storytelling, collaboration tools, presentation sites, and screencasting sites. And if you click on each of these, it will bring you to a list of 3 or 4 different sites with a quick little clip on why I thought that they would be good production sites or screencasting sites, whatever the topic is. And also on the handout that was included in the forum, you can see exactly which of these were new for me and which of these I had used before. So to proceed to the conclusion, there's a quote here from film editor George Lucas, or film producer George Lucas, which is, "When people talk to me about the digital divide, I think of it not being so much about who has access to what technology as who knows how to create themselves in this new language of the screen. If students aren't taught the language of sounds and images, shouldn't they be considered as illiterate as if they left college without being able to read and write?" And I think that that really hits the focus of what this presentation is all about. Students have access to the data and the facts on phones, computers, iPads, all sorts of different technologies that they carry with them at all times. So while yes, the factual information is important, I would argue that now it's even more important than ever to teach students how to take information and really critically look at it, analyzing the source and analyzing what the actual message is. They'll be able to easily look up factual information and be able to recall it at any point. But what we really need to teach them is that they need to know how to look critically at something and really analyze it to see what the message is and what the author is trying to convey, so that they can better accurately have a picture of what they're looking at and what they're viewing. So I hope that this presentation was helpful, and I look forward to your feedback. Thank you!